This is a 2008 Subaru Outback. It has the EJ25 four-cylinder non-turbo engine. This one happens to be a 5-speed with about 96,000 miles on it. I'm making this video because this car has been out of commission for almost 2 years now due to a stalling issue. Basically, this car would not idle once it got hot. It would just stall out. And it took way too long to figure out what the problem was, mostly because it never threw a code and it never reported any misfires. The root cause was this guy. It's basically an ignition coil. So this was a new part I put on during a tune-up, and it's from NGK. I would consider NGK pretty trustworthy. This cost about $100. I did consider this a valid OE replacement. But this one is made in Korea. I think the Subaru ones are made by Diamond, and they're made in Japan. But anyway, the failure mode of this, I've never seen a coil fail like this. And that's why I wanted to make this video. If I can help one person avoid the fate I just incurred, then all the better. Alright, so this is what I call the happy idle state. So basically the engine's cold, it's kind of warming up. If you use a scan tool, you'll see it quickly enters closed loop. So it's maintaining its air-fuel ratio. Everything seems to be normal at this point. And if you drive it, the car drives totally fine. Seems to have the same amount of power it always has. Basically, there's nothing wrong until it gets warm. And then the idle starts to deteriorate, and then eventually you start to get stumbles, and then it'll eventually stall. It amazes me that during all that kind of shaking, that none of that is considered a misfire. So it eventually stalls, as you can see there. It'll start back up. It won't be happy, and it'll just kind of get increasingly worse. But let's start it back up. And so if you put your foot in it, you can mask it, and you can get around. It's gonna basically test your heel-toe skills, because obviously it's a stick, and so driving like that, it's difficult. But you can also do it with the OBD2 tool, where I can jack up the idle point, and I jacked it up to like 1800 RPM, and yeah, it helps, but it's really just idle that's the problem. Just don't want to idle, and she'll just do that, and the more it gets heat soaked, the worse it gets. I just hate to run it like that. It just sounds bad for the cat. So as you would imagine, an oscilloscope was key to finding this fault. I don't think I would have been able to find it without one. Um, I bought a Picoscope T&E version, which is the non-automotive specific one, just because it was cheaper, and basically learned how to use it and started capturing all sorts of waveforms. The one thing I knew by looking at the scan tool data was that when the car started to stumble, the ECU was detecting a lean condition and it was trying to compensate for that. And so I didn't know what was causing that, and, parts cannon was engaged, and so air fuel ratio sensor got replaced, MAF sensor got replaced. Then we started looking for vacuum leaks. So smoke tested the intake manifold, couldn't find anything. Actually pulled the intake manifold off, inspected it for cracks, replaced the intake manifold gaskets, anything to try to explain this lean condition, but to no avail. And so it was only till much later when I started to maybe suspect the injectors that I did this particular test. And so channel A on top there is a secondary ignition waveform, and on the bottom we have the injector pulse. And the trigger is set on the injector pulse. And the cool thing is, when I was doing that test, you could actually see the car go lean, and the injector pulse would lengthen. You could see the ECU trying to compensate. But the real aha moment is right here. So this is the best waveforms I've got. The blue is the secondary ignition waveform, and the red is the injector pulse on cylinder number 4. I'm just waiting for it to start acting up. It's running beautifully today, which is annoying. And I think what's causing these channel... There we go. What was that? Got you. Alright, so here we are in Picoscope 7 TNM. The tool allows you to save waveforms, and in this particular case I asked it to save 64 frames while I was doing that test, and so here they are. We can kind of see them again. We have, in this case, 2 milliseconds per division, and so here in the secondary ignition waveform, this is, from what I understand, is pretty happy looking waveform. So basically we see that the coil oscillates as it's receiving power and charging up. It's basically and then ramping towards the spark line here, and then this is the burn line, and then this is a nice, relatively happy oscillation in the coil again. Typically I think you want to see at least 2 or 3 oscillations here, because it means the coil has had some extra residual power that basically it's strong enough to make a spark and have a little residual left over. And so anyway, in this channel B here in red is the injector pulse. So this is the injector turning on here, and then the length of this is how long the injector is on. And then this is an inductive spike as the power to the coil in the injector is shut off. And then this little pintle hump indicates that the injector is closing. And so basically everything moves along pretty happily until that point we just saw in the video there. And that's basically right around here. And then boom, just everything goes away. It's just like that entire spark event just got just disappeared on us. And I think you can start to actually see, even between these 2 frames, that the injector pulse width is lengthening. The ECU has already detected that this combustion event didn't happen. There's too much oxygen now in the exhaust because the oxygen didn't get burned because the fuel never got ignited. And so even here you see it's even lengthening. And so what killed me when I went and reviewed the data that was stored here is that once it starts to go bad, there are several subsequent injector events with absolutely no spark. Nothing. Just dead. And it's possible
since we're triggering off this, I don't know if you can notice this, but the ECU is advancing the timing. See the difference here? It's shifted this all the way, in front. It's happening at the same time as the injector is pulsing. And so that's, I think the ECU is doing that to try to compensate maybe. And so it's possible that the waveform got shifted off out of this frame because the trigger is still always on this channel. And so I don't know if that spark event disappeared for that long, but what we do know is that it just comes back as if nothing happened. It's like, I'm back, never mind. And this is what is so maddening about this particular failure, is that, granted, this isn't much time. If you look here at these timestamps, this is the same second. I mean, we have 2 milliseconds per division, so we don't have much time on the screen here. But still, there were definitely 4 or 5 injector pulses here. This is, enough, I would have imagined, for the ECU to say, hey, there was a misfire. But if you look at the mode 6 data in the scan tool, it never sees them as misfires. And that's on Subaru. I don't know. I know that they're essentially using an algorithm that compares I think they're looking at the crank angle sensor, and so they're basically seeing if a cylinder doesn't contribute, then the crank is going to slow down between two of the moments in time, and so that's when it's supposed to throw a code. But clearly, whatever error this is, it can't see it, and so it doesn't detect this as a misfire. And so then after the stumble, you can see it just kind of recovers. And then injector pulse is trying to, it's trying to make it more normal. It's basically shortening it because everything's back to normal. And so basically that, this test, I was looking at the injector, but the real fault was in the coil. And so I did a subsequent test to actually try to prove it to myself. And so in this particular one, channel A is still actually the secondary ignition waveform, but there's a lot more time on the screen here. So instead of 2 milliseconds per division, we're now at 1 second per division, because I just wanted to put a lot of data on the screen at once. And so anyway, this is still the secondary ignition form. We've lost all that detail because we have so much time on the screen. But this second channel here is actually the trigger signal. It's the signal the ECU is sending to the coil to say fire. And it's like fire, 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 fire. And if we line these up, this is actually the control. This is when the car is cold and idling nicely. This is what it looks like. And so basically everything lines up as you would expect. Here, every other event is a waste spark event, and normally you would expect to see a taller spark line for the combustion events, but it's not very obvious in this particular one. But anyway, so this is the baseline. This is the happy state, and then waited for it to warm up, and then this is what we got. And so I only have 3 frames of this particular data. But here we are, we're kind of idling along a little bit happy. I think if you listen to the engine, it was fine. But this was the interesting part, was that there was still actually something going on. There's some dropouts. And then, I don't know if you can see here, sadly it's right between the 2 frames. But as these gaps, this is the car stumbling. And so the time between firing trigger signals is getting longer because the engine's slowing down, and during that time you can see just the coil is just screwing up, and then it tries to recover a little, and you can hear this is where the RPM of the engine increases a little bit, and then I don't know if it does it again right here, and so this is a stumble between these marks. And so anyway, that was how I called it, and I ordered a new ignition coil, and I put it in, and everything's fine. So, painful. And so I don't know, this failure. This is not normal. The way this failed is pretty bizarre. I don't know if, going back to this other waveform, it's just kind of hilarious to me that, it could mess up so badly and then within a few, then it's back to normal. And I swear that to me looks normal. So anyway, just word of warning to anyone incurring this problem. Check out your ignition coil or you're going to have a bad day. So anyway, I hope this helps somebody. Typically, there's a really common problem with this particular engine. If you having stalling problems where you're coming to a light and either you push in the clutch or on an automatic, you just come to the light and stop, and then the idle just drops a little bit too far and then stalls. That's actually a pretty common problem, and that's most likely solved by cleaning your throttle plate and then doing what's called an idle relearn procedure. Pretty common. And then something less common is a torque converter on an automatic transmission can actually fail in a weird way that causes that similar stall. And so those are actually way more common than what I just went through. This type of coil failure, I think, it's like being struck by lightning and bitten by a shark on the same afternoon. So I don't know. If you've heard of this before or had this experience, just put it in the comments, because I've never seen a coil fail quite like this. My guess is that maybe there's an IGBT or a MOSFET in there that is heat sensitive and then just started failing. Yeah, the funny thing is if you follow the factory service manual procedure, they don't have much testing procedure. They want you to test the resistance of the secondary coil. And this one tests perfectly, both when it's cold and when it's hot. And so it's a necessary test, but it's definitely not sufficient to detect this kind of error. And so anyway, long story short, don't get unlucky. Unlucky is bad. Anyway, thanks for watching.